Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Witch Hunt, A Traveler's Guide to the Power and Persecution of the Witch, by Kristen J. Sollee, narrated by Amy Mcfadden. Introduction. The witch is a traveler. She has traversed continents, cultures, and epochs, carrying with her millennia of conflicting ideas about sex and gender, magic and power. The witch has made us travelers, too. She leads us on a journey through the horrors and wonders of myth and history. Seeking the timeless archetypal witch, those who were branded witches centuries ago, and those who identify as witches today, requires travel, both literal and figurative. Witch Hunt is a guide through this mercurial terrain. Witch Hunt traces the legacy of the witch through significant sites across Europe and North America. Witches no doubt appear in cultures around the world, but the witch who looms largest within the nebulous conceptual region we call the West, the monstrous maiden out to seduce and destroy men, the satanic sorceress hell-bent on killing crops and livestock, the horrible hag out to consume children, was born in ancient myths, raised in medieval times, and came to full furious fruition in the early modern era. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, thousands of people accused of witchcraft suffered and died. Families were ripped apart. Villages were decimated. Terror, torture, and paranoia ravaged communities. It is a delicate matter to craft a travel guide through such horrifying episodes in human history. Whenever we immerse ourselves in periods of historical oppression, we run the risk of glamorizing or aestheticizing them, which can make light of real people's pain and trauma. First and foremost, this book aims to honor the victims of the witch hunts. And yet, the morbid appeal of the witch hunts is the reason they continue to survive as a subject of intrigue. Cunning women, stunning sirens, and vengeful crones strike fear into the hearts of young and old. Sexually gratuitous confessions and untrammeled cruelty against a backdrop of apocalyptic weather, religious corruption, and personal power struggles, magic, destruction, and seduction, all wrapped up with a poisonously pretty bow. The whole thing is so Shakespearean, the witch hunts literally inspired the writing of Macbeth. The most curious piece of this puzzle, however, is how we got from witch being a word you didn't whisper without fear of recourse in early modern times, to an identity voiced proudly by thousands of people in the 21st century. The transformation of the witch from a figure who had occasioned fear and loathing for the best part of 2,000 years into one perceived as sympathetic, even aspirational, is one of the most radical and unexpected developments of modern Western culture, proclaims John Callow in Embracing the Darkness, A Cultural History of Witchcraft. Witch Hunt explores this radical shift in Italy, France, Germany, Ireland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It tells the story of the witch on the ground through sight, touch, scent, and sound. My journey began with a visceral need not merely to read history, but to feel it in full-body immersion. I sought out art, literature, scripture, and academic scholarship, but my research deepened in the moments when I put myself in a hallowed place and simply sat still. There is no substitute for the magic of place. The witch is both hexer and healer, the demonic and divine feminine, a malicious spellcaster, and an innocent victim of circumstance. She is literary and literal, a figment of the imagination, and a figure as real as you or I. She is a creature of accretion, Pam Grossman writes in Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power. The wicked witch of the Western world can be traced back to benevolent and brutal mother goddesses, as well as female demons, like the Mesopotamian Lilitu, where Jewish lore for Adam's first wife, coom child-eating succubus Lilith likely originated. After Lilith refused to submit to Adam and screeched off into the night, her fertile crescent became the breeding ground for countless other demons and evil spirits. She would transform into one of the great imagined figures of the Western world, Ronald Hutton asserts in The Witch, A History of Fear, From Ancient Times to the Present, morphing to become the matriarch of witches to many Europeans during the witch hunts, and an anti-patriarchal radical to many feminists and witchcraft practitioners today. Another important ancient figure in witch history is Eve. Her transgressive desire for knowledge, proffered by Satan's serpentine steward, got her and Adam kicked out of paradise, forever branding women in Christian mythology as the untrustworthy cause of man's downfall. Eve's actions in this origin story have had a profound impact on Christian conceptions of gender over the past millennium. The history of the witch is by no means linear. There are stops and starts and strange detours along the way. Although ancient traditions played an important role in the formation of European witchcraft beliefs, Hutton writes, they did so in complicated and subtle ways, and over a long period of time. There is a wealth of scholarly and popular writing on the witch's backstory, but the two foremothers who will arise again and again in this book are Lilith and Eve. It's no coincidence that these two witchy progenitors are women. In myth and in history, witches do challenge and even transcend binary gender roles, but remain closely associated with women and femininity. About 70 to 80% of the thousands accused of witchcraft and 80 to 85% of those executed for witchcraft were women. So to call the archetypal witch she is both historically accurate and, in a way, an honorific. There were many men accused of and executed for witchcraft, however, so gender bias and misogyny alone do not account for the early modern witch hunts. In the 20th century, the word witch took on new meanings with the birth of modern witchcraft. Those who take part in the diverse nature-based practices that fall under the witchcraft umbrella come in all genders, but many witches on the feminine spectrum feel a special kinship with the witch figure based on a shared experience of sex and gender-based prejudice and persecution. This kinship is also why some feminists, regardless of spiritual practice, have taken up the witch as an icon in their activism. For many modern witches, their politics are inseparable from their craft. As new forms of public and private rituals of protest, of civic-minded magic, take shape, analytical discourse is confronting embodied spiritual practice. Rituals of collective hexing and healing are making headlines. Covens are canvassing for political campaigns. Protests are rife with witch-centric messaging. The magical world and the materialist world are melding, and in the process catalyzing and fleshing out new ways that politics and spirituality interface in the 21st century. The witch hunts remain deeply misunderstood in the United States, partly because of their continued use as a misappropriated rhetorical device. As John Dumas observes in The Enemy Within, A Short History of Witch Hunting, the witch hunt as metaphor is a mode, most often, of moral reproach. You'll find the phrase applied when there appears to be some allegation of subversive intent, of conspiratorial menace, of concealed betrayal. But although the historical witch hunts were riddled with subversive intent, it was usually society's most powerful who conspired to betray the most vulnerable. That is why contemporary cries of witch hunt from powerful politicians always devolve into a historicism. It is therefore vital that we raise awareness about what happened during real witch hunts. Without sacrificing historicity, I decided to dip into the realm of historical fiction at opportune moments to reflect the witch as both a real and imagined figure. Throughout this book, you'll encounter characters from the past constructed from records and fleeting references. They come in animal and human form. Guilty and innocent, they put a face to the abstractions of atrocity and make history come alive. As I visited many of the sites where accused witches suffered and died, I did what we all do when we travel to historical sites of any sort. Imagine who or what came before. The irony of writing a book like this today isn't lost on me. As a childless woman on the wrong side of 30, as a woman with an outspoken distaste for the abuses of patriarchy, as a heathen who has left the Christian fold, I would not have made it very far traveling through most of European townships and American cities of yore. But in the 21st century, arms adorned with indelible protection sigils, dressed and looking like something Dante would surely envision as one of the devil's handmaidens, I can still move through the world mostly unharmed because of my race and class, apart from the safety concerns that all women traveling alone must face. Over the past few years, my witch hunt research brought me to 7 countries and 45 cities, towns, and villages. I stayed at witch-themed hotels, watched witch-centric plays, attended one witchy amusement park, and a seaside witch parade, visited 2 more than 500-year-old oak trees, partook in a ghost hunt, and perused countless occult bookstores and witch shops. But in a way, I have unwittingly been doing research for this book for far longer. As an only child of divorce, with parents who lived and loved in different parts of the country, I was often alone, or traveling alone to visit them. Being shy and introverted, I wasn't interested in people during these times of solitude as much as I was taken with places and things. Through this animistic approach, I came to view my surroundings as friends, as sources of energy, as entities in themselves that I could get to know, slowly, cautiously, if they opened themselves up to me. Driven by a desire to pick up pieces of the past and to commune with forests and parks, ancient cities and sacred landmarks, I intuitively engaged with concepts like psychogeography and geomantic empathy before I knew there were names for the ways we can become intimate with the physical and metaphysical aspects of a place, and how that place can impact our emotional state. At 3, I was hypnotized by the echoing halls of the Galleria dell'Accademia in Florence and Michelangelo's David, the marble boy with no clothes. Who was he? Why was he? And how did he get there? At 10, I was taken by the dangerous curves of the Minangkabau roofs in Bukittinggi, where my mother and I met women of a Sumatran matrilineal line as they surveyed their coming clove harvest. At 11, I played with prehistoric lizards that lolled on uninhabited islands around the Great Barrier Reef, and my father and I fed them spiced salami from a picnic basket. At 25, I roamed the shimmering forest around the Ise Grand Shrine alone to pay my respects to the Shinto sun goddess, Amaterasu. These experiences are a privilege I acknowledge with gratitude, as they shaped me in ways that are only recently becoming clear. At first, Witch Hunt was driven by this need to connect with the power of place and my intellectual interest in the early modern witch hunts. But as I dug deeper into the research, my own bloodline beckoned. On the DNA ancestry site 23andMe, a map of progressively darker blues denoting recent genetic inheritance tracked my travels with eerie accuracy, a fact I discovered only after tickets had been bought and itineraries made. My relatives lived where we know witch hunts once occurred, in London, Lancashire, and Edinburgh. Fainter blues suggest they lived in Bamberg, too. There are even Italian and French lines further back, denoted in murky percentages that don't make the map. I know from my family's research that the Sollee name stretches to Normandy, to people who lived in Rouen, where Joan of Arc burned, and witch hunts raged long after that. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of ancestral imaginings, but in so many magical practices and major religions, in sacred, profane, and everyday ways, we honor our ancestors, relishing opportunities they only dreamed to have, finishing work they only dared to start. Whether we reject or revere our ancestors and their lives, they are an intimate part of who and how we are. Our narratives don't begin with us. We are the climaxes and codas of someone else's story. Centuries later, the stories of the early modern witch hunts remain meaningful. For some, they are spiritually significant. For others, the witch hunts carry political or ancestral weight. Vital to this legacy are places across Europe and North America that saw the power and the persecution of the witch unfold. Witch Hunt is a gateway to these history-haunted cities and sites, and a catalyst for the curious venture I call witch travel. Blood Stregoneria, Sex Magic. Florence, Italy. Sometimes the past is palpable. Tendrils of memory push through in unexpected ways, twisting the veil of time. Oblivious people traipse by, unaware of the stories that played out beneath their feet. Despite the revisions of progress that transform local terrain, we're left with a magical palimpsest in places where the unspeakable occurred. Sometimes a monument or a map marks the spot. Other times it's a feeling you can't shake, forcing you to flip through your guidebook or interrogate the locals, desperate for clues. Sometimes a place all but screams, "Something happened here." This feeling floats like a fog across the center of old Florence, a city known for its taste, renowned art and architecture exalting the glory of God, gustatory pleasures tempting even the most avowed ascetic. It's also a city where history has been written and rewritten, compressing the most marginal voices into a howling din. Apathy threatens to silence them, but if you open yourself up to it, they're there. You might even feel the pull of the place or its protective spirit, what Romans called genius loci. It penetrates your pores. On my fourth visit to Tuscany, I wasn't content to simply slap on a tourist grin, look at leather shops, at Renaissance art, at locals sharing an after-work carafe under the terracotta roofs that shelter the city. I wanted to get at what lies beneath. Many travel guides prefer to gloss over the grim memories of a place, as if travel were meant only to offer an idyllic version of life, to distract from the flaws in your own. But my purpose is to uncover something with a bit more grit and depth, so we might venture into the shadows, subterranean travel for a psychogeographic trip. I arrived in Florence in the middle of a heat wave. Tourists in the street numbed themselves with gelato and cold white wine, crafting makeshift fans out of street maps and travel brochures. I spent my first few days avoiding the swelter by hiding out in my Airbnb, mere steps from the Museo Galileo, the Arno River, and the Uffizi Gallery. Tucked away inside the Piazza dei Giudici, I sprawled out reading in what was once part of a medieval castle, the stone walls staying relatively cool despite the heat. Knowing I couldn't stay ensconced there forever, I decided to take a long, slow walk on a scorching afternoon. Visitors waiting to buy tickets for the Uffizi, hungry to feast their eyes on the fearsome and flirty femmes inside, Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, Caravaggio's Medusa, scattered in serpentine lines across cobblestones of the Piazza della Signoria, where Florentines once took in spectacles of a different sort. Now the square is a panorama of sculptures and cafes and breathtaking buildings. But for centuries, it was the seat of the Republic and an abattoir for sin. Before the bonfires of the Vanities, when Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola burned books and instruments and paintings and every possible object tempting to body and soul, women were blamed for inciting similar temptations. These women were witches, like Giovanna, who, according to city records from 1427, was accused of drawing the chaste spirit of a man for carnal purposes by means of the black arts. The temperature rose to 101 degrees that day, and I kept walking, wilting, past Santa Croce, past Casa Buonarroti, wandering northeast to the point of delirium. That's when I first saw her, in reflections of my own bleached blonde hair in shop windows, pasticceria, salumeria, an unending parade of shoes and jackets and purses peering back at me. She was a mirage in every mirrored surface, her green gamura kissing the cobblestones, hair in a feral cascade, rouged cheeks raised in a sly smile. Somehow, not a single bead of sweat marred her diaphanous face. I leaned in to follow the figure's undulations. I was in Sant'Ambrogio now, an area loved for being slightly less of a tourist trap. Weaving my way through the Jewish neighborhood and bustling market stalls, I was in this haunting vision's thrall. Finally, I passed through the great wooden doors of the church of Sant'Ambrogio, and under the vaulted ceilings, the apparition took shape. She materialized as Giovanna, born to Francesco El Toso, a woman alive only as much as heat-induced hallucinations allowed her to be. The air inside the church was thick and still. This was Giovanna's parish, the place St. Ambrose was once said to have laid down his head in the 4th century. This was a destination of pilgrimages, the foundation unchanged since 1230, when a priest found a chalice of wine had miraculously turned to blood overnight, a fitting place for a practitioner of blood magic to guide me. I sat down on a pew to catch my breath, and Giovanna sat, then knelt, next to me, her prayers not supplications, but whispers that pricked my ears. Candle flames did not waver, footsteps did not echo, as she shared herself with me. "Jacopo," she intoned. The stained glass flickered and became a film strip of their history. The room filled with their heat, the potency of illicit lust frothed from the corners of her mouth. Jacopo di Andrea was her lover. They had several trysts she tried to extend without luck. She once had him drink her menstrual flow in his wine, afterward chanting, "I will catch you in my net if you don't flee." She made him taste her juices mid-coitus and used enchanted words to seal the spell. Jacopo the doublet maker was hers again and again, until he wasn't. One look at Giovanna, and you wouldn't think she'd need to use love magic at all. A coquette with a cause, the fine pearls she wore clutched her delicate neck for dear life, in defiance of her adulterous bent. On her, the necklace didn't symbolize innocence. Chastity, humility, virginity, all false gods to a woman who survived on her wits, her wantonness, and, yes, perhaps even her witchcraft. But vanity? Vanity was something she could work with, too. Using alchemy of a different sort, Giovanna had spent painstaking hours to transform her hair to gold, as was the Florentine fashion. First, taking the shells of walnuts and bark from the same tree, she had boiled them in water, then applied the mixture to her hair, adding alum and apples, and tying her tresses up away from her face so it might set. Days later, she added crocus, dragon's blood, henna, and Brazil wood to achieve a color cut from the rays of the morning sun, just as the Trotula had taught her mother, her grandmother, and her grandmother's mother before her. Beyond Giovanna's glamour spells, I wanted to know why she had done what she'd done, if she'd done anything at all. Da che tu vuoi saber tanto adentro, dirò-ti brevemente. Her voice hypnotic, like a swarm of bees, she replied with innuendo delivered from Dante. "Since you wish to know so deeply, I will tell you in brief." Hands a steeple, head bowed, she continued to channel her acts of love so I might understand. After Jacopo came Niccolo, she said, whose children she bore, and whom she tried to get back from Hungary and into her arms. That attempt would have her accused of raising a demon in an act of divination and creating wax images for her magic. Giovanna's lips moved rapidly in retelling as her tongue continued to conjure. She spoke of another married man, Giovanni, who paused by her door one day in her parish and couldn't help but stare. His eyes devoured her before she even had the chance to return his gaze, to invite him inside. But she wanted his devotion and his virility. So Giovanna fashioned a charm out of melted lead that she sweetened with her words. It was from Monagiglia, the druggist, that she purchased these items. Giovanna's charms eventually worked, whether magically or metaphorically I could not be sure. Giovanni was so taken with Giovanna that his chaste spirit was deflected to lust after her, so that willy-nilly he went several times to her house, and there he fulfilled her perfidious desire, the record said. And that might have been the end of the tale. After all, not all adults engaged in adultery make the history books. But when Giovanni's love did not bloom as brightly as she wanted, she upped the ante. At the advice of a certain priest, she added distilled water from the skulls of dead men to Giovanni's wine. He drank unwittingly, but it was not enough. Next, she snuck her menstrual blood into Giovanni's cup, as she had done with the others, so her paramour could keep up with her carnal demands. And he did for a while. Giovanna reaped her reward and married Giovanni, but as he had betrayed his first wife, he would betray her, too. She knew how it would end. The olive leaves had told her so. Named a magician, witch, and sorceress, and a practitioner of the black arts by the Florentine court, Giovanna left the world littered with the unworthy men she had lured into her bed, all before quite literally losing her head. In early June, she confessed to her crimes, because they were true or because she had no choice. She was beheaded in the square, killed for her desires, or his desires, their desires. In the dim church, in her eyes and on her lips, I did not know which. Giovanna spoke no more. I left Sant'Ambrogio as merchants flagged me down to inspect scarves and gold rosaries that shimmered in the afternoon light. Driven to see what witchcraft might mean in Florence of 2019, I crossed over the Ponte Vecchio and took a sharp left on the Via de' Bardi. A pointed witch's hat on a green sign beckoned, La strega nocciola. I remembered it from the first time I visited Florence over a decade before, when I had been told ominously by a local that the women behind the counter knew exactly what flavors would please my palate. This gelato witch myth turned out to be partially true, but much like Giovanna's workings, you're likely to end up with something pleasing when you're dealing with the sweeter things in life, like sex or ice cream, even if your magic is a little off. After my dessert divinations were complete, I licked the last of it from my lips, hazelnut, if you must know, before forging ahead. Past the parks that flanked either side of the street I walked, past churches and apartment buildings. I was directed by my GPS to stop once I reached a small storefront with an owl in the window, wings outstretched, welcoming. Not dissimilar to the many witch shops I frequent in the United States, La Soffitta delle Streghe smelled of herbs, incense, and melting wax inside. The woman behind the counter began to offer her help through a patchwork of English and Italian, showing off tarot decks and books for sale, as well as divination and healing services. La Soffitta delle Streghe might seem, for all intents and purposes, the contemporary equivalent of a shop a medieval spellcaster like Giovanna might visit for guidance and the right raw materials. In the recorded details of Giovanna's case, she spoke of consulting 2 women who helped her in crafting the spell work necessary to gain the favor of men. There was a druggist and a certain diabolical woman who came to her aid when she sought their advice. The druggist's name was revealed, but the second woman's was not, for the public good, in the event that anyone in possession of the information might attempt Giovanna's spells too. But the guidance and goods Giovanna required weren't combined into a one-stop shop as they are today. She got her magical needs met where many of her time would, at church, at the apothecary, and from other women in her community. I perused the selection of books in La Soffitta delle Streghe, hoping to learn more about Giovanna's witchcraft. There were volumes on disparate topics like Norse runes, Haitian voodoo, Eastern mysticism, British Wicca, and contemporary Italian stregheria. I kept looking for something distinctive to the area that would help me connect in some way to medieval stregoneria, but that I knew was a fool's errand. The pagan cum Catholic folk practices the Florentines deemed witchcraft are largely distinct from most kinds of witchcraft practiced today, and often at odds with the mores of contemporary culture, particularly when it comes to consent in love magic. Although there are certainly surviving grimoires of learned men from medieval and early modern times, the magic of women is harder to uncover. Giovanna's love magic is known more through its persecution than its execution. Her witchcraft lives on in a liminal space. I left the witch shop with Giovanna's confession in mind, the sun igniting the aquamarine waters of the Arno behind me. Some 600 years later, the other woman archetype lives on. She is the scapegoat, punished for inciting male lust, ruining
Sample complete. Ready to continue?